The long-awaited Arknights collab has finally arrived in Limbus company. With it came new stages, new cosmetic rewards and, most importantly, 4 new ego skills. Tidal Elegy Ishmael, Command Meltdown Faust, To Remain Oneself Honglu and Unbrilliant Glory Gregor are the 4 new egos that allow our sinners to wield the power of characters from another world. Which is cool and all, but are the skills actually good? Or do they just look good? In today's video I will dive into exactly that. We'll look at all 4 collab egos, talk about their functions and how to use them, and then we'll see how they perform when used by the best IDs in the best team compositions. And after that, I also want to talk a bit about the egos and the event in general, so stick around. But before we start, I have to remind you that most of my viewers are not subscribed. So if you find yourself coming back to my videos or end up enjoying this one, consider subscribing. It takes just a second and helps me out a lot. Without further ado, let's get back to the ego skills. We'll start with Tidal Elegy Ishmael, the free reward you can get from the collab without having to pull for it. I won't be going over the entire ego and all of its effects, instead only focusing on the most important parts. This ego skill has the Anchor Proshu skill 3-2 mechanic of having attack weight but getting much stronger if there's only one enemy and that attack weight cannot be used. It also gets slightly buffed by sinking and deals more damage against gloom weak enemies or when used in a gloom resonance chain. The tremor and sinking infliction of this ego is pretty bad, and mostly exists here to tie the skill to some keywords for mirror dungeon gifts. As for Tidal Elegy's corrosion, it loses the extra buffs against one enemy, and gets more resonance-based effects instead. The skill gets attack weight and damage, and also gains the ability to buff allies by giving them blunt and gloom damage up. The skill also inflicts gloom fragility alongside the cosmetic sinking and tremor infliction that it still has, further increasing the damage of the team. As for Tidal Elegy's passive, it's actually a pretty big buff. The effect it has makes Ishmael clash better and deal more damage when facing a boss, and also gives her some tiny buffs when subbing in from the backup. Now, what is the purpose of this ego? Well, as I already said, the status effect infliction of the skill is effectively cosmetic, and notably the buff that it gets from sinking comes in the form of clash power, not even final power, meaning it doesn't rely on sinking for damage output. And damage output is exactly what this skill is good at. With high gloom resonance, Tidal Elegy can output a nice amount of damage to a group of enemies or a large boss, with that damage increasing greatly against gloom weak targets. But the value of this skill doesn't stop at physical damage. Tidal Elegy has 3 coins, meaning it can give you the value of 3 on-hit effects, namely sinking. This isn't a big deal when hitting a human, as it just lowers their SP, but abnormalities take damage from the effect, meaning that pairing up this skill with something like Rhyme Shank can result in a lot of AoE gloom damage being output in one turn, through the ego itself and the sinking procs that it gets. As for single target boss fights, the role of the ego doesn't change. It still is a nuke button, and it still capitalizes on sinking damage against abnormalities well. It works extra effectively with Solemn Lament's Butterfly, dealing even more gloom damage with all of its coins. Though if you're using Spice Bush, the value of the ego against one boss drops slightly as you don't get Butterfly, and you play for the Deluge nuke anyways. Speaking of Spice Bush though, the corrosion version of the skill inflicts gloom fragility under certain conditions, and that effect can increase the damage of sinking Deluge. Is it relevant? Not really, but it is a fun fact. As for the tremor side of things, the ego is not as usable there. It's still a damage button, but with no sinking to capitalize on, and a myriad of different skills being better than this one, Tidal Elegy Ishmael won't see much use in that team. Although, if you have literally nothing else to press, it's not terrible, just not usable realistically. As a general note, the passive this ego has is quite good, as an 11% damage increase after clashing is nothing to scoff at. The second part of the effect is a bit funny though, as it's one of the worst buffs ever concocted. To even activate it, you need to start with Ishmael on field, have her use the skill, then recall her to the backup and then send her out again. And all you get for this little dance of wasted resources is effectively 1 haste and 1 clash power. I'm pretty sure this effect is a reference to the character this ego belongs to, but it's a ridiculous buff nonetheless. Next up, we have to remain oneself Honglu. This skill plays with poise and sinking, and while the sinking is cosmetic once again, the poise actually does have a lot of effects on this skill. The skill gets power from poise, and using it without Thunderer gives back half of the resources and SP that it costs you to use the skill. Honglu gains Thunderer after using this ego, and if he already had the effect, it turns into higher Thunderer. These effects cause to remain oneself to deal more damage with 2 separate buffs and gain more weight. The buffs granted by higher Thunderer are greater than those given by the base version. As for the skill's corrosion, it has 1 more coin, 1 more attack weight, and also gives poise count on use. It loses the resource refund, but retains the Thunderer mechanic, and still gets buffed by those effects greatly. It also adds some pride damage with very low caps into the mix. But hey, more damage is more damage. As for the skill's passive, it allows you to gain 1 copy of the least owned ego resource among Sloth, Gloom and Pride at turn end, which is pretty good. It also increases Honglu's damage for every Thunderer or higher Thunderer consumed or lost during the fight. So what is this skill good for? Once again, to remain oneself Honglu is an AoE damage ego skill, but it does have some quirks. First of all, it's passive. It is possible to simply use the skill once at the beginning of an encounter to activate its passive. This will provide your team with extra resources, most likely Sloth, as the poise team generates far more Gloom and Pride than it does Sloth. Though this effect can be useful on other teams as well. The passive is similar to that of Contempt Awe, but it's worse in like every way. If you do intend on using the skill for damage, you need to keep in mind that the skill is designed to be spammed. The first usage of the ego is cheaper and gives Thunderer. The second turns Thunderer into higher Thunderer, and starting with the third, to remain oneself Honglu is fully set up, and can start outputting pretty good damage. The skill lacks the gimmick that Tidal Elegy Ishmael has, meaning it's not particularly amazing against bosses, but it is great at cleaning up crowds. One thing you need to be mindful of when using to remain oneself is the fact that the ego does not give you any poise count, meaning that repeated uses of it will eventually drain your stack, so you need to stack up count between uses. Luckily, both Thunderers linger for 5 turns, so you're not forced to use the skill every turn. Also, its spammability is helped by its passive, which provides exactly the resources necessary to keep using to remain oneself. Overall, the Awakening version of the skill is a good button to press instead of something like a Full Stop or Lord Honglu skill 1 for more damage. And using the skill repeatedly doesn't cost as much as you might think, and provides good value in multi-target encounters. I wouldn't call this ego game-changing or even super notable, but it's definitely there and can be useful in certain fights. As for the skill's corrosion, well, it has the same role as the Awakening. It gives poise count on use, meaning that is no longer an issue, and the free pride damage that it deals adds to its overall damage output. However, the skill faces a different issue. It costs 25 sanity, 5 more than the Awakening, and overclocking the ego to get access to the corrosion makes it cost 50% more, so 38 SP in total. This leaves you at 7 SP if you use the skill at 45, and to deal a lot of damage, you need to hit heads on 3 coins while having 7 SP, which is very far from something you can do consistently. But if you have enough skill to simply hit heads, the corrosion is another big damage button. Overall, the skill is kind of bland, but it gets the job done against groups. Next up, we have Unbrilliant Glory Gregor, the only WoW level ego skill this event has to offer. And let me begin by saying your other option is Garden of Thorns, so this skill is automatically the best option in its slot. As for what the skill does, take a wild guess. Yes, it's more AoE damage, very original. Unbrilliant Glory is split into 2 forms, Flowing and Incandescence. Flowing is the first form you get access to. It's unclashable, cheap and doesn't even hit an enemy, much like Tears of the Tarnished Blood Honglu. After attack, you get a stack of this ego's unique resource, get most of Gregor's SP refunded, and also a slight buff. Once you have Man in Scabbard, you get access to Incandescence. This skill becomes clashable at 40 Man in Scabbard, and isn't clashable before that. The skill gets most of its power by consuming this resource, gaining attack weight, defense level up, protection and damage, as well as recuperating part of its cost. Incandescence also deals extra damage based on burn and tremor, gives back SP when staggering or killing enemies, and reapplies Man in Scabbard. The 1 coin of the skill gets reused based on Man in Scabbard consumed. The final coin deals extra damage, and the skill also gets some status effect mechanics, although they're pretty forgettable once again. As for the skill's corrosion, it's supposed to mirror the 4 coin Incandescence, as it has 4 coins and gets similar effects from consuming Man in Scabbard. The skill gets powered up against 3 targets, gets 1 base power at 40 Man in Scabbard, which is kinda funny, and then consumes the effect for offensive and defensive buffs. It acts pretty much in the same way as Incandescence, with all of its other effects as well, but it has some different numbers. As for the ego's passive, it allows Gregor to gain Man in Scabbard under certain conditions, and at 40 stacks of the effect, Gregor also gets unstaggered if he gets staggered due to damage once per encounter. As for how good this ego is, it's the best out of the 4. To get the big damage skill, you effectively need to pay twice, with the first use only requiring 1 Wrath, 1 Sloth and 1 Pride, all common resources in the Burn team. After that, you can get to 40 Man in Scabbard reasonably quickly, which is when you unleash Incandescence. Speaking of, don't use the stronger version before 40 stacks. You're losing out on far too much damage, and the ego isn't cheap enough in both resources and SP to be spammed while you're waiting for 40 stacks. The skill's defensive buffs are honestly irrelevant for the most part. If you just started out and got Unbrilliant Glory, great, now your Gregor won't die as quickly. But if you've got yourself a full team, you really don't need the protection or the defense level up. I know people will point out the existence of Zwei Gregor, but come on now, he's irrelevant outside of self-imposed challenges. As for where to use the ego, the only real answer is Burn. Or the Burn Tremor hybrid team, I guess. You can't exactly make use of the skill in Tremor due to Gregor not even having an identity for that composition. Also, Tremor already has egos to press, and is a team that mainly specializes in killing bosses quickly. So adding a slow setup AoE nuke into the mix really wouldn't do you much good even if Gregor did have a Tremor identity. Last thing I want to touch upon is Unbrilliant Glory's passive. It allows Gregor to gain more Men in Scabbard when getting hit or when his allies take too much damage. Using the aggro provided by the effect, you can set up the ego a turn earlier with this passive, which is pretty good. Also, there's the Unstagger effect, which can potentially come in clutch, or might just simply do nothing if you're playing well. Overall, there's not much else to say. You use the ego on turn 2, and then you send out the stronger version once you have 40 stacks. It deals a ton of AoE damage, which helps out in any multi-target encounter. That's about it. Not exactly the most interesting ego skill this game has to offer, but it's still a powerful tool for any long encounter where you need AoE. And finally, we've made our way to command Meltdown Faust, the green fluid sac of the bunch. The awakening version of the skill has 1 coin, gets some mild offensive buffs, provides 10 stacks of Faust's unique resource, and multiplies the maximum stack of that resource if Faust already has it. Then it heals 2 lowest allies for 30% of Faust's max health and for 15 SP. The HP healing prioritizes Faust, but if she's full HP, then it goes to someone else. And then the 1 coin of the ego inflicts cosmetic burn and rupture like all of these egos do. As for the corrosion, it basically turns into less Lu with more attack weight. Also, it still interacts with hardened shell barrier, and it actually hurts Faust if the ego didn't kill or stagger anyone. As for the skill's passive, it provides constant healing based on hardened shell barrier, with the same targeting as the ego skill, and that healing is increased for very low HP allies. Also, the unique effect of this ego usually goes down by 3 at turn end, but the second half of the passive makes it only go down by 1, as long as command Meltdown was the last ego skill used by Faust. Okay, so how good is this ego? Well, if Gregor is the strongest one of the 4, I'd say this skill is the weakest. The awakening version of command Meltdown is there for the healing. If Fluid Sac is an instant team-wide boost of HP and SP, and Thoracalgia provides continuous healing after just 1 use, Meltdown is a combination of the weaker versions of both of these effects. The HP healing it provides only hits 2 allies, but it heals them for a lot. The SP healing also hits only 2 allies, but this effect doesn't heal for an impressive amount, and due to the ego's SP cost, will also more often than not spend one of its slots on Faust herself. As for the continuous healing the skill provides, it's not too bad. The effect only targets 2 allies once again, but the stack begins at 9, so it can actually provide a lot of health. This is pretty much all I can say about the Awakening. It has a damage buff, which makes it deal damage that is slightly higher than nothing, but for the amount of resources it requires, the damage is far from good. Which makes sense, considering that's not why you would want to use command Meltdown anyways. As for the skill's Corrosion, this form copies an existing ego archetype once again, this time taking up the same niche as Lasso and Tears of the Tarnished Blood, Rupture AoE damage. If looked at in a vacuum, the skill is pretty good. It's got 4 coins for proccing Rupture, it only goes -2 in count, and it gets up to 5 total weight based on resonance, so it can hit an area as well. But now let's look at the skill realistically. It requires 5 gluttony to use, meaning it's very difficult to fuel anywhere outside of Rupture. And in Rupture, your Faust is running her Mao Branch Adept identity, the strongest one in the entire game. And with how Mao Faust works, this means that using command Meltdown in any form needs to provide more value than a Mao Faust skill 3-2 to even be worth using. As for the Awakening, it's a healing ego, so I immediately don't like it all that much. Because despite all the unbreakable coins and unclashable attacks, overwhelming offense still destroys any need for healing. Additionally, it takes up the Faust Haze slot, meaning it's going up against Fluid Sac and Thoracalgia. And in terms of HP healing, this skill is a side grade to both, as it can heal more HP on a given ID, but targets fewer allies, meaning it's better in different scenarios. That being said, the Awakening lacks the extra offensive value the other 2 egos provide, as Fluid Sac can propel your team into high sanity numbers, allowing for better clashing and damage, and Thoracalgia helps your entire team keep up poise. As for the Corrosion, it's fine, and can maybe find some usage in human encounters if you don't have other options. But realistically, the steep cost of overclocking the skill that comes in the form of far too many ego resources, far too much SP, and losing out on the ability to nuke down a given target with a Mao Faust skill 3-2, all the while a better option is readily available, makes Corrosion command Meltdown a skill that is simply not very useful. And against one enemy, it straight up gets outclassed by a base skill that Mao Faust always has access to, which is kinda funny. All in all, command Meltdown is yet another healing ego on Faust, and somehow it's pretty much worse than other options you already have. The 5 gluttony cost makes this ego difficult to fuel in almost every team, and the one team that actually fuels it well simply doesn't want to use it. With this, we're done with the 4 Arknights collab ego skills. So if you wanted to see how well your newly acquired loot stacks up, now you know. Before I end this video, I want to say my piece about the collaboration. It's nice that we got a collab, and I did see the high player count that came with this event. But it's insanely unfortunate that the story for the event is getting permanently removed after the collab ends. I get making egos through limited, but wasting resources on the creation of what effectively is a whole intervallo just to tear it all down a month later is a terrible decision, especially when the game is in a clear content drought, with no new refraction railway for players to test their strength in. People are also mad at the drop rates, and while the outrage over ego banner rates is justified, it's also not something new. Ever since the first ego banner that featured the Dimension Shredder duo in Season 1, we've known that those drop rates are a scam. I'm not sure why people are only getting mad now. As for the egos themselves, they're all kinda boring. None of the skills do anything particularly good with status effects. So all the infliction is there just for Mirror Dungeon Ego Rock power stacking slop. 3 out of the 4 skills are just damage, and the 4th one is healing, so they really don't have any interesting niches. There's this fake uniqueness to them in the form of, well, you need to use this ego twice actually, or every time you use the skill it gets stronger, which adds some depth to them, kinda, but still doesn't make them particularly fun or engaging. But while I do dislike the fact they're boring, power-wise the skills are actually where they need to be. Not super strong to the point where not pulling on the event banner bricks your account, and not so weak that no one wants to use them. Every skill here, with maybe the exception of Command Meltdown, is a worthwhile pickup that can be useful in certain fights, but all of them are still completely skippable, as they don't carry any teams or anything. Those are my thoughts, but what are yours? Leave them in the comments. And now it's time to wrap up the video. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe, you know the drill. Goodbye!